It's my pleasure to introduce Jody Polizzi from the HCI Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. Jody is a trained designer and publishes in the top computer science venues like human-robot interaction, human-computer interaction, designing interactive systems, and received close to 10 Best Paper Awards and nomination on these venues. On a personal note, Jody's PhD student, Bilge Mutlu, who is in Wisconsin Medicine, was in my PhD committee, and I had a great time interacting with him because he brought that fresh perspective of design into my work that I try to instill in my own students now. So it's good to be able to see how good practices can trickle down across generations, which Jody has done in this case. So with further ado, let's have Jody have a talk.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thank you everybody for having me here on this beautiful day. Today I want to talk about service design as a new way to extend and deepen what we're doing in human-computer interaction. But I wanted to talk a little bit about myself because probably a lot of you don't know me. I'm trained, as Hassan said, as an interaction designer and design researcher. And I'm really interested in how what we design evokes social behavior. And I've worked on systems ranging from virtual displays to robots that mimic human beings. And I'm interested in taking a research through design approach to understand how products evoke social behavior. And I was actually the first design person hired in the School of Computer Science at CMU, so we had to really teach about and tell people about what design is. And what we do as designers is we understand the state of the world, and then we suggest a future state to what we design, and we codify knowledge in that way. So in my view, the research that we do is complementary to what the human scientists and technologists are doing, but it's actually quite different. And I have several areas of research. One is designing to support the limits of human attention, all the ways that we're bombarded with textual, auditory, visual information. How can we manage it? I look at big data and what it means for design, looking at how the metadata that we create with our smartphones and the systems we use can be used to make meaning. I do a lot of work in human-robot interaction, ranging from social and assistive robots to medical robots and automated tractors. I look at designing educational games, how we can use design to increase motivation and learning. And then I do a lot of research on service design, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So HCI, my field, has a history of evolving its methods and processes as the problems HCI researchers and designers are working on continue to change in terms of their function, context, and complexity. So in the early days, HCI was about the communication between a person and a computer system, about making things that operators could use. This was really human factors as applied to computing, and the discipline of HCI was created. Then HCI became about making systems that other people than operators could use. It was about making computers to help people complete, usually tasks at work. This was the beginning of user-centered design, and HCI again developed methods to understand users and design computational systems that fit their needs. Then around the 1990s, as interactive technology moved out of the lab and workplace and moved into the home and mobile contexts, technology began to pervade more and more aspects of people's lives. And HCI became really interested in holistic user experience and understanding how people experience products and engaged all of their senses in making things. And HCI again evolved methods to understand user experience and evolve its practice. However, today HCI researchers and designers are increasingly being asked to make new kinds of things, social things, societal things, and things that are products or systems. And so in my talk today, I'm going to propose that we take another step, a step to actually consider service design as an additional perspective in HCI. This is not to say that we're going to throw out what we've already done and what we do well, but rather an evolutionary step for HCI research and practice. And so today I'm going to talk about why we should add service design as a lens in HCI, And to do that, I'm going to talk about HCI's evolution in research and practice, and try to show how practice drives research, and research therefore drives practice. And then I'll try to argue that HCI's definition as it stands now and the practice that we do are not aligned today. To understand how we should add service design, I'm going to tell you what service design is, and then I'm going to talk about some of the benefits of adding a service design lens to user-centered design or because I'm actually a designer that works with technologists, this is a very design-centered view of HCI, kind of like the New Yorker's view of New York that you see here. And I think my ideas are probably design-centric and therefore incomplete, so I welcome any questions, comments, or reactions. Okay, so first I want to talk a little bit about this evolution of HCI that I set up in the beginning of my talk. Many histories of the discipline of HCI have been written. And basically, they talk about advances in research and practice sort of being like a chicken and egg. One fuels the other. So for example, Brad Myers has written about technical advances in our discipline, which enable new kinds of HCI research. Jack Carroll has talked about HCI's evolution as an interdisciplinary field and how changes in industry push what happens in research. And Harrison has written about 3 distinct paradigms of HCI. Mark Redding has written about HCI as the focus on the things being made. He talks about how in the beginning, HCI was about operating the machine, then about using the software, then about performing a task, and then about having an experience. And so I really like this breakdown of human factors, user-centered design, and user experience design as maybe being the 3 broad brushes of HCI. So HCI's birth as a discipline came from developing computers for operators. And people began to apply human factors principles to computing technology. This diagram, which if you're an older person in the room, you probably know, and maybe if you're a younger person, you don't, is called the baby bubble head. This is Card, Moran, and Newell's model where they describe the human as an information processor. And by doing this, we tried to model and predict human behavior when interacting with computers. And this worked at the level of perceptual, cognitive, and motor processing, and some of this was applied as small as at the level of the keystroke. So for example, Project Ernestine was a famous project in HCI. How many people know about that? Oh my goodness, I'm getting so old. Where these predictive models of human performance were used to test a new industrial call system for operators. And HCI researchers predicted that this automated call system that was going to go into place would actually be slower than human operators, and that the call center should not use it. So by using these models from HCI research, the project demonstrated to industry how it could be successful in developing new products. Then HCI embraced user-centered design as we went through an era where there was a broader concern for the user. People began to be concerned with the needs, wants, and limitations of the people using the product and argued that it needed to be considered in the design. That the product should be optimized around the users rather than asking users to change their behavior to do something. And the model shown here is from Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, and it basically shows that what a user thinks about a system and a designer thinks about a system might be different, but actually it needs to be the same in order to have a successful product. And so in this era of HCI, we saw a lot of new methods coming in to help teach about user-centered design. And these were inspired by participatory design, which was a European movement which was centered actually in Marxist philosophy to empower people in the workplace. That when technology came in, rather than losing their jobs or being de-skilled, they would actually be able to actively construct how this technology would be used. In the US, this movement sort of went from democratic empowerment to economic gain. Those same techniques were used to make successful products. And in the US, it developed as contextual design. which is a design approach aimed at managers and IT managers, where researchers go into the workplace, they observe aspects of employees' work, they model the observations, they create new designs based on the work models, and then they hold prototyping sessions with the users to get feedback on their ideas with them. Finally, the third era of HCI was this concern for human experience. Technology moved off the desktop in commercial products like VCRs, TVs, mobile phones. And HCI began to focus its practice on the broader experience of use. We went from the usefulness, effectiveness, and efficiency of the usability era to something that was desirable, meaningful, and experiential. So some researchers derived theories of experience as they related to HCI to try to help designers and developers to understand the experience of what we're designing. And at this time, we saw many methods for user experience, and this is still an active research area at CHI, where things like experience prototyping, where design teams simulate the experience of a thing by acting out the thing, and other methods like cultural probes, speed dating, and others. This picture is actually from IDEO. These people are doing an experience prototype of an airline trip, and you can see they're laying on those tiny chairs to simulate sleeping in a row of the airplane. So now that I've sort of set up these three areas of HCI, I want to talk about how HCI's definition, as we know it, actually conflicts with the work that we're doing today. And this is fueled by advances in cloud computing, internet technology, and smartphones, which are essentially sensor suites that we carry constantly. As I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, we're working on areas like social computing, design of services, and design of systems for social innovation. And this work, I believe, is in conflict with how we talk about HCI. So I want to talk about each of these areas in turn. So social computing involves research and development on systems that allow people to work collectively. Its roots are in CSCW, and it's found in online communities ranging from bulletin boards to open source projects to social network and media services. It includes product and service search systems that allow people to rank and rate things like Yelp. It contains crowdsourced services like Wikipedia and Iodine. It contains producer-consumer services like Etsy and Instagram, where you can be making things, but you can also be looking at the other things and buying things that other people made. Crowd work services like Mechanical Turk, and the many new peer economy services like Uber and Lyft, which interestingly are actually even changing public policy and law. So I believe that the way we talk about HCI and the UCD and UX lenses don't fit this kind of work. These lenses are a poor fit for social computing, where the goal is to develop a sustaining social ecology among a diverse set of stakeholders, which is quite different from user experience or user-centered design, where we're generally focusing on the experience of one person using one computational system. In social computing systems, there are many users or stakeholders. Users have customers, and the term user fails to capture the components of the system that needs to be designed. So if we look at Yelp, for example, there's the people consuming the reviews, there's the people writing the reviews, there's the establishments that are being reviewed, and there's the advertisers. And those are four very different stakeholders, any of which we could call a user. In addition, in the vast and growing research and development on crowd working systems, crowd workers who edit documents or transcribe audio or do things to help us are really not conceived of as users with their own sets of needs and desires, although we're seeing some now new researchers looking at crowd workers and the ethics of being a crowd worker. The second area that I want to talk about is services. And by these services, I mean technology-enabled internet services, mobile apps, and things that traditionally supplement human services like kiosks, self-purchase stations, and web and mobile shopping sites. These two have their roots in the rise of the internet and cloud computing. And they also have multiple stakeholders. But things that are interesting about services is that they're not purchased like products are, so there's never an exchange of value. Consumers never own anything from using these services. They get their value from the moment of use. And one big subset of these services we call software as a service. And to exemplify that, I'll talk about Microsoft Office versus Google Docs. At one time, customers drove to a store and they bought a shrink-wrap box of Microsoft Office. And they took it home and installed the 15 to 20 discs, DVDs that came. Yes, the dinosaurs in the room were getting. And they paid for the item. And what you got in return was a bloated set of features. You probably used a few of them. And then you had a set of software which had version issues, compatibility issues, etc. And Google Docs provides a nice service counterpoint to this and represents this growing approach of software as a service. Docs provide much of the same functionality as Office. However, Google services are free. So in return for having your actions monitored and using these services, you get a free, lightweight application, which allows for collaboration, which allows for no problems with versioning, etc. The fact that the service is free without ownership negates this role of the user as a customer. And this is a radical innovation that has stolen a lot of people away from Microsoft Office. And then you think about it from the Google side, Google is now tasked with designing something that millions of people use every day. So user-centered design and user experience lenses don't fit here either, because services have many stakeholders, and services follow a disruptive innovation model of creating a reduced offering at a lower price. This works against the philosophy of user experience, where we're creating this lavish experience for a user. Finally, designing experiences means considering an underlying economic model, something that we rarely do in HCI. The third type of research we're doing that I would argue doesn't match the way we define HCI is systems for social innovation. This is a new type of research in the HCI community, which goes beyond designing a computational system. It could include things like guiding people towards more sustainable behavior, promoting healthy eating to reduce obesity, increasing citizen engagement with their governments, or designing technology for populations with little access, such as the homeless or the poor or the incarcerated. And these research efforts, I think, are triggered by the perception that social computing can support collective action. So CHI has been doing this for a while, but the way we define our discipline really doesn't fit this kind of work. And within CHI, we've seen the growth of several communities that try to address this social innovation. For example, HCI 4D focuses on developing technology for people in developing countries or marginalized populations. HCI Sustainability focuses on developing technology to lead a lifestyle that is gentler on the earth. But social innovation focuses on changing people's behaviors, even when they may not want to change. And a lot of times this work requires the design and development of things that aren't connected to a computer. It could be human behavior, environments, and human scripts for action. So now that I've talked about these three new areas of HCI research and practice, which are fundamentally different than how we talk about discipline, I want to talk a little bit about service design. Service design is an interdisciplinary field of research and practice, which has traditionally focused on the design of services for commerce, banking, and healthcare. Service design emerged in reaction from the transition from manufacturing and selling products to delivering services. Service design grew out of operations research and marketing, two disciplines rarely mentioned in HCI. And then in later decades, we could buy a cake from a bakery, and today we can order a custom cake with somebody's picture sprayed in the icing. So all of these things essentially deliver the same experience, but by very different means. And you can think about other experiences like buying shoes or listening to music or having coffee that have changed as a result of technology and the advent of service. This New York Times article from 2012 chronicles the shift in our economy from products to services in the last 3 decades. In the 1960s, the most profitable countries in the US were goods-producing companies, shown on the left in yellow. Companies like GM, Ford, and Westinghouse. But then fast forward to 2010, and we see that the most profitable companies in the US are now developing services. Companies like Walmart, Kelly, and Target. And companies are now developing service strategies instead of commodities. Even companies like General Motors are recasting what they do in the light of service. And that means we have to change how we're training the people that will go out and design things. So services are different than products because they have tangible and intangible aspects. So if you take, for example, the experience of staying at a hotel, there are both tangible and intangible things. There's the decor in the room, the lotions and soaps, the robes, the lobby area, but then there's also intangible things like room service and the check-in. The takeaway from the service is something intangible. It's our resulting experience of the hotel and its brand. One other difference between products and services is that services are co-created. They require the existence of a customer in order for them to exist. And the third difference is that services are produced at the time they are consumed by an individual. And this is different than products, which get manufactured no matter what. And if nobody wants the product, they actually end up in the landfill. So there are a few relevant aspects of the service design lens that I'd like to recap. First, services are intangible. Second, they're produced at the time the service is delivered. Third, they have many stakeholders. Fourth, they're co-produced by customers and providers. 5, value is co-produced. And finally, technology, such as tracking technologies like smartphones, change service. It means the role of the customer can change and services can adapt over time. When we design these services, we're asking designers to make much more than computational systems or tools. We're asking them to design roles, environments, and scripts for workers. So when you're designing a service, you're actually designing something intangible. You're designing a plan. So designing a service means recording and communicating the relationships between elements of a service, how services unfold and change, and how services interact with other services. So service design is generally represented in the form of models or shared representations. And they include a stakeholder model, service blueprint, experience journeys, and value flow models. I don't have time to go into these in detail, but I'll just give a few examples. Many times, researchers will overlay many methods to understand the complex system that is the current state. And they'll use this technique called gigamapping that is used to map and understand all the aspects of the system that we have to design for. A conceptual model then is used to sketch out a high-level description of how a system is organized and operates. The system model that I showed from Don Norman a few slides ago is a conceptual model of how a product is perceived. A stakeholder map details the total set of relationships, usually from the perspective of a single stakeholder, and then we go across the service actions. An experience journey follows the service transaction of one stakeholder, focusing on the emotional aspects of the experience or the breakdowns. And then a service blueprint maps how resources are created to enact the products for the system. So collectively, these elements express what's happening when the service is enacted, and it may contain the design of other things within, such as a kiosk, or a counter, or an environment, etc. So now that I've talked about service design, I want to talk about how a service design lens can benefit interaction design in HCI. And I want to give an example from my research. So one of the problems that many HCI researchers are working on is obesity. Nearly 65% of the world's population is obese and lives in a country where obesity and associated illnesses kill more people than disease from being underweight. So this societal problem is very interesting to researchers and product developers, as you probably noticed on the market. Starting from as early as the 1970s or 80s, there were many products and services aimed at helping people to lose weight in a healthy way. So for example, this has also been an interest in HCI, and some people have investigated this problem space with personal informatics, which are systems that monitor, make sense of, and visualize details about people's behavior with the goal of supporting positive behavior change. But many questions remain unanswered about what is the best way to help people from being obese. And here too, I think a service framing could be beneficial because it could go beyond individuals to include other stakeholders like families and supporters, medical staff, trained professionals like dietitians and trainers. It could even impact restaurants and food providers, and even policy and lawmakers. So in our research group, we were interested in applying technology to the problem of obesity, and we focused in on snacking. Snacking is also a big problem in the US as it continues to increase each year, and the data shows that it comprises over 25% of a person's daily caloric intake. So there's many, many solutions to how and why people snack and making sure they snack in a healthy way. And we took a service design framing in our work to explore if a robot that acted as a social assistant could help people make healthy snack choices. So I'll play a little video of our robot, and then I'll talk about the service framing that went along with the project.
I have an order for caffeine. Please take your cookie. Thanks, Patty. Enjoy your snack. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
So what you saw in the little clip is SnackBot, a snack delivery robot, which comes with a snack delivery service. We developed this over a period of about 4 or 5 years to explore some of these questions around obesity. The reason why a service design framing was beneficial was we could look at the many stakeholders, customers, other people in the workplace, other snack providers, the robot developers, the designers, the researchers, the robot's assistants, and the people who obtained and loaded the snacks each day. We took a service design framing to develop this robot holistically, rather than advancing one aspect of the technology per se. We conceived of this product service system to track information about people and their preferences and their behavior over time. And subsequently, we understood not only how the product worked, but how different social effects developed as it went over time in the community where SnackBot is situated, and as people appropriated in new ways, sometimes creating very unforeseen effects of the technology. So we did many service design studies with this robot. We looked at how relational versus utilitarian approaches to delivering snacks might vary what people do. Relational being people wanting to have a positive social experience from the technology versus utilitarian, treating this like a vending machine. We looked at how we should design a recovery from a breakdown in service. When technology breaks down, what's the best way to recover? Turns out it's actually to apologize. It's quite effective and it works for a robot. We studied how services should be personalized and how they should adapt over time. This work has great implications for the many autonomous systems that are in play, ranging from recommendation systems to home-based systems like the Nest staff. And we looked at the long-term effect of personalized service in the workplace. How do people change over time? It turns out with this robot, we actually have people pretending to be others to get their snacks, to get the personalized service. It was quite fascinating. We also looked at the effect of a variety of snack choices, varying whether we had delicious looking apples and crappy looking cookies, would more people take the apples, by hiding the cookies underneath, would people avoid the unhealthy snacks. And then we looked at the effect of a robot knowing someone's choice. So by framing the research in this broad way, it was much more than just about designing this robot. It was looking at the implications of the many varieties of the system in play on stakeholders within the system. So now that I've talked about service design, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits and the drawbacks. And there's 3 benefits that I want to touch on. The first is that service offers a systemic approach. The second is that it allows us to co-produce value. And the third is that it allows us to look at economics as a design material. So let's talk about the systemic approach. Now, some of the limitations of UCD and UX is they advance as if a single interactive product is a solution to every problem. However, many new solutions exist within systems of products. And so service design provides a higher level view. It offers a systemic framing that better supports the challenge of designing for multiple stakeholders, and there's sometimes conflicting needs. You'll have a higher view of the forces at play in a given situation, and you'll have a broader space for solutions. Most importantly, I think, we can teach people how to explore what they're developing and look at any unintended outcomes of what's designed. So for example, if I'm looking at the problem of someone adhering to their medication at home, a traditional HCI or user-centered design approach might be to develop some kind of medicine reminder system for the person taking the medicine. But if we took a systemic service approach, we could look at all the factors in the system. Someone may not be able to get their medications. They might not be able to read the package information. They might have interactions with other drugs. And we could evaluate what would be the best intervention to support this problem at hand. So with this service framing, we can explore possible innovations and unintended outcomes and look at what benefits and advantages a new design offers. Second, we can look at co-production of value. And as I mentioned earlier in my talk, this is quite different than user-centered design or user experience, which focuses on the needs of one user. A service framing considers a reciprocal relationship between the stakeholders and the design. We can ask, what can the customer do for the service provider while the service provider does something for the customer? And looking at a problem this way, we can expand the solution space and address the needs of many stakeholders. So this co-production of value is not about money. It's about understanding what different stakeholders might want. A really simple and beautiful example is the reCAPTCHA. While we are typing in a code to make sure that we're a human and we're going to have secure computing, you're actually doing something for reCAPTCHA. You're helping to disambiguate scan text that will help the company itself. So this reciprocal change of value in reCAPTCHA is really beautiful. It's a nice example of what to design. And then finally, we can look at economics as a design material, something that we rarely do and we rarely teach our students. Because the flow of value is an element of service design, economics now becomes part of our design material. This almost never plays a role in user-centered design or user experience. While we all know that pricing models and payment plans have a huge influence on how people engage with things that they buy and the technology use, the mention of economic models is almost never present in HCI today. And we argue that looking at economics will reduce the risk of making things that will fail. So for example, think about services like Lyft or Airbnb. One of the biggest motivators for people to try this kind of service is the perception that it'll be much cheaper. And this can only happen when the design team will identify value opportunities for other stakeholders. What's in it for the people selling their service? What's in it for the people consuming? So considering the economic model underlying the service, will be one of the easiest ways to make sure we're designing the right things, to make sure that we're innovating new things. Because let's face it, one of the ways of shaping people's behavior is to disrupt how they think of things. So the real goal here is to not forget about user-centered design and user experience, but to enrich HCI with this multiple problem, multiple stakeholder framing that's common in service design. So to recap, the systemic approach better supports multiple stakeholders. We can take on societal issues beyond the scope of a single user. We can develop systems that allow us to look at interactions and relationships across a whole system, unlike user-centered design and user experience, where we're focused on the creation of a single thing. And finally, we can look at value as a part of the design, looking at the co-production of value between multiple stakeholders in the service. This value becomes a new material that we can play with as we design and develop things and envision a future state. Now, there's also some limitations to service that I want to touch on, and I think that these will be important to resolve as we go forward. First, traditionally, service has a very simplistic framing. While it relies on looking at multiple stakeholders, usually this is the relationship with the customer and a service provider. And so I think new problems like societal problems and social computing will need a richer understanding than this. And I think this is a huge research opportunity for HCI. Second, most of service design today focuses on the innovation of current services. It doesn't work as well to create entirely new things. As I told you earlier, the design process usually involves mapping and understanding the current thing and then tweaking it to make a new thing. I think the huge growth in social and mobile computing, as well as the general desire in HCI to create entirely new things, is a little bit at odds with this aspect of service. And so again, this need to push on more complex relationships is a good area for HCI research. Finally, current service design is really timid in its use of new technology. It's mostly things like ATMs and kiosks. And so this can also be seen as an opportunity for the HCI community. It's here that we can bring this culture of innovation to service and really embrace what service design is doing well, while service can embrace what HCI is doing well. So in conclusion, today I tried to talk about how HCI continues to push the boundaries of the kinds of things we're working on. And this has been in part by the advance of cloud computing, the internet, and the ability to have sense data at hand. I tried to argue that the current lenses of user-centered design and user experience are insufficient for taking on these challenges, and that we should explore service design as a framing for tackling these issues. It's a little surprising to me that these two fields have remained so separate, but what I'm proposing today is not for HCI to take over service design or to forget about user-centered design or user experience design, but rather for HCI to become a small part of the greater service design community. But there could be a symbiotic relationship to enrich our field and complement what we already do well. So thanks for listening to my ideas today. I'll be happy to take questions or give more examples if it's helpful. Thank you very much. Yes, question in the back.
Can you discuss the tension between personal data and privacy and how most services are not only not opt-in, there is no opt-out, and that most services are not honest about the dissemination of personal information. If we're moving into a more digitized healthcare, that's a
Yes, that's a great question. So in case people couldn't hear.
Just wanted to add to his question, which is that with respect to your example of robots, it did probably, I mean, you had to know what sort of snacks the people.
They ordered the snacks from the site, yeah.
Okay.
All
right.
So the question back here was, could we discuss the role of personalization, especially with concern for privacy? So my area of research is not privacy and security, although it is a huge area. I can speak a little bit to knowledge that I have from some of my research that people don't really understand how personalized services work, how autonomous systems work, and how information is collected on their behalf to better deliver services to them. So I think this is a huge area and it's a problematic area. I think that more needs to be done to communicate to people what aspects of their data is being collected and how it's being used.
But in terms of security, then, do you believe that cloud can be made compliant?
Yeah, I know what HIPAA is. I'm just reflecting on that. I think the short answer is no. I mean, in the medical community, there's hardly now even a place where there's secure storage of this kind of information. It's a huge problem. One startup I know is trying to bring box-like secure storage to medical information, but it's kind of like the Wild West. There's not a lot of synchronized research going on. That's my perception of it.
So we're just going to use the 50 million credit cards going out.
Well, I hope not. I know it's really scary actually when you think about it. I will say the other research I know about is that there's generally a feeling that people will sacrifice some of their privacy in return for better service or better care. So
That's generation.
that's generational. Yeah, good comment. And so your question about the robot was people knew that they were delivering.
No, I mean there were privacy ramifications for people, like, I mean, who you used for the study. So were there any, like, what did you learn from?
Yes, well, these people opted in to be in the study.
Okay.
So having given permission to do that, yes, we did record the snacks that they ate. It was a measure of how they perceived the service. I think in a study situation, it's quite different than if you buy some commercial product like the Nest or even using Google Docs, your actions are being monitored. You're opting in to do that. But again, I think people don't understand that a lot.
And then this question, probably I have another question which might be a little vague and it's out of my expertise, which is with these sort of experiments that you're conducting, you can probably identify short-term effects, but when you take behavioral science, we also are worried about the long-term effects. And how does HCI play a role in long-term effects in understanding?
Well, HCI should play a role in understanding the long-term effects of technology. Take human-robot interaction, for example. The technology in many cases is not enough developed or robust enough to look at experience over time. So when we ran this snacking study, it was 5 months in duration. That was one of the longest studies that anybody had done with a system that was developed within a university. Unbelievable, right? So I think we have a long way to go to be able to understand how this technology plays out over time. There is some research in HCI where people try to operationalize the theories in behavioral economics to try to see if what we design can help people decide. So some of the research on the robot looked at present choice bias and some other theories, and we're applying some of that other research in areas like leaderboards for games, etc. But that's pretty new stuff, so I don't have a lot of specific information to say about it, except that I think you've identified another huge area of research. Yes?
On the snack bot, was there robot feedback? I would imagine if you're getting a cookie over an apple and the robot frowns at you, when you choose the apple, the robot smiles, sort of sticks and carrots, which will perhaps affect the choices not immediately, but the next time somebody gets
right. So you saw SnackBot's a little limited in its physical expression, but we designed 2 modes of behavior for the robot, a social mode and a personalized mode. And in the social mode, the robot would chat with people about things that people at Carnegie Mellon would know about, like Carnival and the weather and the Steelers game. But in the personalized service, we actually created dialogues that involved things that the robot knew about people. So where your office was, what your role was, how often you got a banana, how often you got a chocolate chip cookie. And those dialogues, we did see people ordering the fruit more often. We also created a measure where we had a mystery snack. So your office, you ordered a banana, then it had a bakery treat in a bag with a question mark, and it would say, gee, Jody, I know you ordered a banana today, but I have this special mystery snack if you want it. So we also used that as a measure to see if people would change their mind at the last minute. And often in the personalized condition they did, and that was where we had people pretending to be others so they could get the special snack. So there was a little bit of novelty bias. There were some interesting effects of this technology in the workplace. Question back there.
Yes. How does the service design extend or go beyond ethnography, ethnographics, that's industrial ethnography?
Yes, it's a good question. I think ethnography is one of the methods we would use for service, but there's a lot of active prototyping. There actually will be a lot of paper prototyping with screens. There can be acting out of services. So it's kind of a multi-method approach. I think if you're interested in specific detail, there's two things I could recommend. One is to search gigamapping and take a look at the methods involved in that. And then there's another nice book by Bella Martin and Bruce Hannington, which shows some of the methods that are used in service. And Andy Polane has a nice book where he talks about the 4 phases of service design. Question?
Has there been any work in how these sorts of service systems work in areas where there's heavy compartmentalization of information?
Can you give me an example?
Working at the U.S. Postal Service.
I can't speak specifically to a lot of it, but at Carnegie Mellon there was a project to redesign the DMM, which is the General Postal Manual, and the goal there was to take a really general document and make it relevant to lots of people. So it was kind of the opposite, which I think is a little bit of what Google Docs is or Google Services. They're services for everybody. So I don't know, maybe there's a trend actually going against that. I don't really have good information for you. So it's an interesting question.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So I like the ideas of service design, but I'm just wondering, as a student or even professor, if I'm going to apply this to my own unique problem I'm working on, how do I get started? What would be your advice?
Mm-hmm. How did you get started? Well, I'm going to speak from my time teaching and some things I see students struggling with. So one common thing we see people struggling with is synthesizing information and understanding the current state. So a lot of times we'll do some exercises where we create models. We might model something as simple as making a pancake, or we might model a little problem like, fool me once, do this, fool me twice, do that. And that exercise is so important because it teaches us to distill down the factors or components in the situation we're designing for. So I think that simple modeling activity is a good way to start. There are many processes for teaching service design, and as the person back here pointed out, some of them rely on methods which are commonly used in HCI and design, like interviews, observations, surveys, etc. Then I think we come to another fundamental weakness that students struggle with, which is figuring out the implications of what we choose to design. So if I design the pill box, the pill reminder, what parts of the problem am I forgetting or not thinking about, or need to be in the forefront of my presence? I think that's another particular piece, and I'm working to develop some kind of design tools and models to help people do that. And then we execute the service. We make a plan and we test it out and try to execute it. So at CMU, we have 3 service courses. One is a basic service design, of which this modeling is a huge component. We have another service course that focuses specifically on technology tracked about people and how services might adapt in response. And then we have a third course called Mobile Service Innovation, where they look at the business model while they're designing the service. They're creating essentially a startup, within the semester. So I don't know if that's the kind of information you're looking for. Question?
So I'm curious about your work in human-computer interaction. As a millennial, I've noticed a movement towards human-computer interaction replacing human-human interaction, right? And I'm really interested in getting into HCI, but I'm struggling with the idea that we're moving towards a future where the only interaction that we'll be having is with computers.
Mm.
I just want to know your opinion.
Well, I would hope that that's not the case, and I think in all the work that I've done, I try to argue that technology can never replace people, that it can augment what we do well and help us to do more. So for example, when I first started at HCI, one of my big projects was looking at how robotic technology could assist the older population. And oftentimes the first response you get is, well, you're going to be removing caregivers who are so critical. And I think in all the observations and the work that I've done, the finding and the desire is not to replace what human workers do, but to better help them do their jobs. So I think it would be a pretty sad world if we're going to be at a place where we only have technology. I mean, I can't imagine it. So I think some of it is the burden of the HCI researchers and practitioners themselves to say, people are at the core of what we do. It's not just computing.
So going off of that, what would you say is the ultimate goal of human-computer interaction as a field?
I think it's to develop technology that helps people work and play and live their lives. I don't think it's to replace what people are doing. I mean, in the broadest, you see HCI trying to work on problems like technology for the homeless and people in jail. So I think it's to extend what people do well.
To follow up on the question and your answer seemed to be so general that you can plug in any other.
It's true.
To say that's the goal.
Yeah. I mean, my background as a designer, designers are a little bit different because they have a general set of skills that are applied over a number of domains. So it might be different than a technologist in HCI, talking about what HCI does. Remember my New Yorker's view of New York. This is very much my design center view of what it is.
So, sorry, finish, go ahead.
So how does the definition of a service can overlap with the definition of product? Is it possible? It can be based on perspective also. You mentioned Google Docs as a service, but someone who is developing that service may not say that I'm looking at the product or Google Docs.
Yes, you make a good point. You can. I think actually the best way to conceive of something, excuse me, is a product service system. So going back to the example of the GM car, we no longer just have the car as the commodity. We have people talking about the sales experience. We have the service experience. We have OnStar in the car. We have all the systems that are tracking information about the driver and the operation of the vehicle. So actually, I would argue that that's a product service system. And if you go back to my graph from the New York Times, and you think about companies like Target or some of the others, there are actually a lot of products that are involved. But also there's the service, which is kind of the glue in between the subsystems.
So I want to respond to the comment that Torgal and then Chen responded.
Mm-hmm.
From my own perspective. So when I was doing my PhD, I worked with Cynthia Brazil, who works on robots. And she has a project where she has robots that can, for elderly, right? So when you become really old, you need a robot that can help you out, that can have a conversation with you because you're lonely. At the same time, I was working with Sherry Turkle, who wrote a book called Alone Together, Why You Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. She hates this kind of idea of using robots to help people with conversation. And what we realized that the middle point would be to not to give the illusion to the elderly that this is robot is here to help you with your loneliness, but to use a robot to bring its caregivers together. The robot should bring the sons and daughters of the elderly together and have a more meaningful relationship. which would be the goal of this technology.
Okay, for that particular technology, I think the question was the goal of HCI, and I don't think the answer is unique to HCI, because we all are here to help people live better lives. You can say education is here to help people live better lives. Not HCI.
The study and development of technology.
Looks like a good topic to have after during lunch. Or let's thank our speaker.
Thank you.